think it's time that we uncancel Johnny Depp. And I speak for everybody in society when I say, I just really want to see this dude back portraying Captain Jack Sparrow, a drunk pirate inspired by Keith Richards. It's so much fun when he's in that character. A character in which he has been paid $265 million for to portray to this date. And on Stranger Tides, it is one of the most expensive movies ever made. It cost Disney $410 million to make. And then it came out and it got terrible critical reception, terrible audience reception, and people were like, oh my God, this is going to be a massive disaster. But Johnny Depp is a movie star and everybody loves watching him as Captain Jack Sparrow. So this movie, instead of being a disaster, it turned a massive profit. It did over $1 billion worldwide at the box office, proving once again that no price is too much for a studio to pay to get him in this role. That is why Disney gave him $55 million for this movie, which today, adjusted for inflation, is over $76 million. The studio didn't want to make this film, but Tom Hanks, he believed in it so much that he decided to take a performance-based salary in order to convince them to do as such. But even then, the studio, which was Paramount, they didn't like certain scenes in the film, and so they wanted to cut those scenes from the movie, like the Running Across America montage, but Tom Hanks, he told them that if they weren't going to pay for them, he'd pay for them himself out of his own pocket, and in return, he asked for just more equity in the movie, which to their credit, they agreed to do. And this belief in his film called Forrest Gump, it paid off in a major way because when it was all said and done, it was nominated for 13 Academy Awards, winning 6 of them, including Best Actor for Tom Hanks. And at the box office, it did over $700 million worldwide against a $55 million budget. So when it was all said and done, that meant Tom Hanks, for betting on himself, he made $60 million, which today, adjusted for inflation, is over $126 million. In 2014, Netflix signed Adam Sandler to a 4-picture deal valued at $250 million. That breaks down to about $62.5 million per picture, which today, adjusted for inflation, is about $85 million. And his first movie in that pact was called The Ridiculous Six, a movie that has an astounding 0% approval on Rotten Tomatoes. One of 44 films in the history of cinema to achieve this vaulted status. The last being Ice Cube's iconic movie, The War of the Worlds. But at the time that Adam Sandler signed this deal with Netflix, people in Hollywood, they were a bit confused because Adam Sandler was still one of the few comedic actors that actually had box office draw. And at the time, people didn't really understand streaming or how people's viewing habits changed. But over 10 years later, people look at this deal as one of the shrewdest in the history of Hollywood with how people consume content now. To the point that Netflix re-upped the deal and the same price for that deal in 2017 and 2020. And they reported in 2023, the first 6 months of that year, Adam Sandler movies had been watched over 550 million hours on their platform alone. Harrison Ford claimed that he was retired from acting. In fact, he hadn't been in a film in over 2 years and he had no plans of returning. And then one day, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas, they called him up on the phone. They're like, hey, Harrison, would you be interested in returning for a 4th installment of the Indiana Jones franchise? And Harrison Ford was like, no, Steven and George, I told you I am retired from acting. And they're like, well, I guess that's that. Harrison Ford's not going to return as Indiana Jones. And then the studio Paramount, they decided to call up Harrison Ford and like, Harrison, good old buddy, old pal, do you want to return? And before he could get the words out, Harrison's like, I told Steven and George I am retired from acting. No, I am not returning. What if we offered you, Steven and George, 50% of the film's profits? Would you then want to return as Indiana Jones? And Harrison Ford, he thought for a second and he goes, yeah, I think I can return as Indiana Jones for a 4th installment. I would say that was a very good choice, financially speaking, because that movie, it would go on to gross over $800 million worldwide at the box office, making Harrison Ford individually $65 million, which today, adjusted for inflation, that is nearly $100 million. Depp spoke 661 words total in this entire film. That means he was paid $103,000 per word that he spoke. For perspective, one of my minute-long videos, I typically say about 200 words. That means Johnny Depp, he did 3.5 of my videos and he was paid $68 million. I can assure you that nobody will ever pay me $68 million for my videos, but good for Johnny Depp. Nice work if you can get it. I am sure that he spent that money very, very wisely. Did you know that's also almost $100 million today adjusted for inflation? But I guess it was worth it because when Alice in Wonderland came out, it was a massive hit. It made over $1 billion at the box office against a $200 million budget. Plus, it spawned a sequel that unfortunately was a giant flop. In fact, it was the first in a string of flops for Johnny Depp that were so bad that Forbes magazine did a profile on him that stated that he was the least valuable movie star in all of Hollywood because a typical studio would receive about $1.20 back in returns on $1 spent on him, which was way below the average for a movie star who typically saw $2.80 back on return on $1 spent on them when their movies came out. Angelina Jolie was originally offered the lead role in Gravity, but after her agent got too greedy in negotiations, the studio, they pulled the offer and they gave the exact same offer to Sandra Bullock, who obviously accepted because honestly, it would have been crazy not to. And after Angelina Jolie found out what Sandra Bullock was making on the movie, she got so mad at her agent that she ended up firing them. And Bullock's contract is absolutely insane. She was paid $20 million up front plus 15% of the box office profits. So that meant after the studio was cash flow positive on the movie, Sandra Bullock, she was making 15% from there on out. And when this movie came out and it did $723 million worldwide at the box office against a $100 million budget after marketing costs and theatrical splits, $361 million in profits, that is what the studio saw. And Sandra Bullock, she made 15% of that $361 million. That equates to $54.239 million on top of the $20 million that she already made for a total of $74.239 million for a single movie role in one film. For the very first Mission Impossible film, the studio Paramount, they didn't want to pay Tom Cruise's normal fee. And he was like, yeah, that's cool. You don't need to pay my normal fee, but then you're going to have to give me 20% of first dollar gross. But not just for this Mission Impossible movie, for every single Mission Impossible movie thereafter. And first dollar gross, it is a rarity in Hollywood. It's unlike box office grosses where the studio, they have to be in cash flow positive on a film before entering profit participation. First dollar gross is when the artist that has it starts receiving money from the very second that money begins trickling in on the very first day it hits theaters. And the previous Mission Impossible movie before Ghost Protocol, it really hadn't done too well, so Paramount, they wanted out of this contract with Tom Cruise. And Tom Cruise, he was like, okay, that's cool, maybe I'll move on from Ethan Hunt. So him and the studio, they approved an ending to the Ghost Protocol movie where his character would end up getting hurt and effectively have to retire. But throughout the course of the shoot, Tom Cruise, he realized that the movie was something special. So on the day that they were going to have to shoot that scene, he showed up to set and he told the director that he was not going to shoot the scene because he was not leaving the franchise and he was not leaving Ethan Hunt. They then called up the studio and told them what Tom Cruise said, and they said, all right, well, then change the ending, change the scene, in which they did. And that was a big thing and a good thing that they did because when it came out, Ghost Protocol, it was a massive hit, doing $700 million worldwide at the box office against a $145 million budget, and it completely revitalized the Mission Impossible franchise. And Tom Cruise, for his efforts, he made $12 million up front on the film, plus an additional $63 million on back end, meaning he made $75 million for this movie alone. Marvel wanted to cast Tom Cruise as Iron Man with Robert Downey Jr. not even being on their radar because of a string of legal issues in the late 1990s and early 2000s that made him virtually uninsurable as an actor. And having an actor that you couldn't insure meant that you couldn't insure your production, and That was extremely risky and unheard of in Hollywood, because that meant if you had any injuries on set or anything went wrong, it was completely out of pocket. But they still brought Robert Downey Jr. in for a screen test, and it was so incredible that it changed everybody's mind and made them think that he was actually worth the risk. And this led to one of the most iconic contracts in the history of Hollywood, because they only offered Robert Downey Jr. $500,000 up front for the original Iron Man, but they also gave him 8% of the profits on the film, but not just the original Iron Man. For the next 6 films in which Iron Man was one of the lead characters, and the 6th film of that contract was Avengers Infinity War, and it made Robert Downey Jr. $75 million after the film grossed $2 billion worldwide at the box office against a $400 million budget. Will Smith turned down the role of Neo in The Matrix because it felt too risky. He didn't understand it. 2 first-time directors trying to pitch him their vision of something that was just confusing, and then he would read it on the page and it would be even more confusing. However, Keanu Reeves, he was at an impasse in his career, and he was looking to shake it up, do something that was transformative after coming off of Speed. So he was all in with their vision, and so much so, he decided that he was going to take a pay cut of his normal $20 million in upfront salary and take only $10 million. And in return, he also received 10% of box office profits, but not just on the original Matrix film. On every single Matrix film that came thereafter, he received 10% of the profits. And when this movie came out in 1999 and it became a global phenomenon, making $470 million worldwide at the box office against a $63 million budget, that meant Keanu Reeves, he banked himself another $73 million in back-end money, plus the $10 million up front, for a total of $83 million. Jack Nicholson knew that Batman was going to be a hit, so when he negotiated his contract, he didn't ask for his normal upfront fee of $12 million. Instead, he asked for $6 million plus a portion of the box office profits and the merchandising from the film. But not just on the original film that he was appearing in, for all subsequent sequels that Tim Burton would be directing in the franchise. So that meant he would be making money whether he was in the movie or not. And when the original Batman came out and did $411 million worldwide at the box office against a $50 million budget, that meant Jack Nicholson, he made himself an additional $54 million. However, when Tim Burton came back and directed another film called Batman Returns, a movie in which Jack Nicholson's character doesn't even appear in it, he made himself an additional $30 million. So in total, Jack Nicholson, he made himself $90 million for portraying the Joker for just 3 weeks of work. In 1997, for the first Men in Black film, Will Smith was a rising star that commanded a salary of $5 million to lead the film. And then, a few years later for the sequel, he was one of the biggest movie stars in the entire world, so he got $20 million up front plus 10% box office profits. And when this movie was a giant success, that meant that Big Willie, he made $64 million for Men in Black 2. So when the third one came around, he was like, yeah, that contract, it was pretty good. It worked out good for me. So I'm going to take that exact same deal, $20 million up front plus 10% of the box office profits. But this time, the contract, it is going to be pay or play, meaning Will Smith, he was getting paid whether this movie was made or not. And with these contracts, it is for an allotted amount of time. So $20 million, it was for 16 weeks. And every single week they ran over, that $20 million, it was prorated on a weekly basis until the end of production. And this movie, it was plagued from the very start because they began shooting the film without a finished script. And this led to many delays. And normally, an actor, they would be pissed off about this. But Will Smith, with his pay or play contract, he's like, nah, I'm good. I'm just chilling. And it took so long to finish this movie. When it was all said and done, Will Smith, he made $100 million in upfront fees from Men in Black 3. Bruce Willis took a discount. He cut his normal upfront salary from $20 million down to $14 million to star in The Sixth Sense. And in return, He received 17% of the box office profits plus 17% of the home video sales. And when this movie came out and was a worldwide phenomenon, doing $670 million worldwide at the box office against a $40 million budget, that meant Bruce Willis, he cashed himself an additional $70 million in checks. But that is not even close to where this story ends, because The Sixth Sense came out in 1999. The following year in 2000, it came out on DVD. That is at the height of the DVD boom. And The Sixth Sense, it became the #1 selling DVD in the entire world for that year. In fact, it is the #2 selling DVD of all time and the #1 rented movie of all time, selling over 20 million copies. And that meant Bruce Willis, he got an additional $31 million from the home video sales on this movie for a total of $115 million, which today, adjusted for inflation, is over $200 million. Paramount is Tom Cruise's home studio because he is the only actor in Hollywood that still receives first dollar gross, meaning he doesn't have to wait for the movie to come out and become profitable before seeing his profit participation. He starts seeing money from the very second the movie hits the theaters. And so on Top Gun Maverick, he decided that he was going to reduce his upfront salary to just $13 million. And in exchange for that, he was going to receive 20% of the first dollar gross on the film. And the studio Paramount, they knew from the beginning that they had a giant hit on their hands, to the point they decided to sit on this film for 2 years until theaters reopened after the global pandemic. And when it came out, it was a global phenomenon. It is often credited with saving movie theaters. It did $1.5 billion worldwide at the box office against a $145 million budget. And then it came out on home video, and it was the #1 selling VOD of the entire year. In fact, Paramount said that this movie alone, it increased their revenues by 28%. And for his participation, Tom Cruise, he received his $13 million up front, and that 20%, it was worth $107 million for a total of $120 million